Olá a todos, então bem-vindos aqui ao Osteotalks. Estamos de regresso ao nosso podcast e o nosso Osteotalk de hoje tem o tema de trauma crânioencefálico e a saúde mental. E vamos estar à conversa com a Joanna Wildy. É licenciada em genética, é licenciada em osteopatia pela BSO, foi docente e examinadora também na área da osteopatia. Desde há uns anos é investigadora na EVOST, aquele grupo de estudo e de investigação sediado na Bélgica. Tivemos aqui o convidado Jean-Paul Hopner há uns meses, exatamente deste grupo, da EVOST, e é autora do recente livro Mind and Membrain, Head Trauma and Mental Health, a New Approach to Diagnosis and Treatment. Basicamente, Membrain, referência ao cérebro e à mente, e o trauma crânioencefálico e a saúde mental, uma nova abordagem ao diagnóstico e ao tratamento. Joanna, thank you so much. I've been following you on LinkedIn and on social media, and I found this topic of your book and this title fascinating. I know you've been teaching and researching a lot in the cranial field. You've been together with this research group, EVOST in Belgium. You're also your examiner and teaching, and you know there's a lot of the cranial field has been together with this osteopathy since the beginning, or at least since the UK more. And there's lots of stuff to say about this cranial field, but I really enjoy the approach and the science you bring into this topic, and that's why I invited you. And thank you so much for accepting. Can you just introduce yourself a little bit, like where, like in a very summarized way, how was your path from osteopathy to the interest in the cranial field, and then more specific to this mental illness and head trauma?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've been in practice a long time, I think 35 years, something like that. Started my training in 1984 and went on to quite quickly do the postgraduate cranial college courses, and realized very early on that there was some sort of association between historic head trauma and mental health, because I personally experienced a very bad reaction on my first cranial course, which left me feeling very depressed, and I didn't really understand why. And I spent a couple of months feeling rotten, and then a colleague who was experienced in cranial osteopathy treated me, and the depression lifted. So then I went and studied again, and exactly the same thing happened, but I was a sort of objective observer at this point, and I realized that it was when I had untrained hands on my face that I had really quite a bad reaction. And then I linked that with historic face trauma as a child, not emotional, physical trauma, physical accidents. And since that time, in 30 years of practicing in the cranial field, I have paid as much attention to my patients' mental health as I have their physical health. And I've realized that there is this link between historic head trauma leaving a legacy, which may or may not be well compensated for. But if that compensation breaks down, it disturbs the housing, the environment of the brain, namely the skull, the membrane, the irrigation system. And that is something that we, as trained osteopaths in the cranial field, can really help people. And I think it is a major contributing factor to certain people with mental health problems, which is just not in the public consciousness. It's not in the public consciousness of us as practitioners. It's not in the consciousness of patients. It's not in the consciousness of psychotherapists or psychiatrists. So the point of the first part of the book was to introduce this idea. It's really difficult, actually, just trying to change the whole world's, perspective on this, that there is this very significant contributing factor. And unless it's dealt with, patients will search for a solution for their mental health problem, and it won't be solved. They need someone like us. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So when you even the title mind and membrane, you're referring to the membranes, to the neuromeningeal tissue, and that surrounds the brain. Is that the mind and membrane are referring specific to the neuromeningeal tissue involving the brain and also the brain itself, right?
It's what it's referring to is the relationship between the brain and the cranial membrane system. I'm not specific about structures or layers. I mean, I talk about the dura because it's such a tangible structure. And so, yes, that's what membrane, and it's a new word, and I realize it's a new word. And sort of frankly, if I regard what I've done as a success, that word will be something that people will understand in maybe 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and
I think it's
that
super,
relationship.
I think it's super clever because you have your brain goes to the membrane kind of thing, but in reality it's the same thing. We're actually talking about membranes involving the brain, so it's a very clever word. And and so we know about this head trauma, especially a closed head trauma. There was no fractures, there's no bleeding. We know this focal. We know that there's focal injuries and more diffuse injuries, from hematomas to hemorrhages, and then even from the acceleration forces, we can have axonal disruption, cytotoxicity, all of that consequences that may last days, weeks, months, and sometimes the manifestations can even not show up immediately, and that's when I actually taught a class about this, because we have to be mindful of some red flags, because
absolutely,
if the patient comes with a headache and then suddenly had a head trauma history, then we have to be aware that that's
a very important point, actually, because what I always say is, some people say, "Oh, I've just banged my head. Can I come and see you?" I go, "No." I have to see you in 3 or 4 weeks. I have to wait until your body's done whatever it needs to do with that trauma, self-correct, get worse, come out as sinister, or if it's just a sort of more superficial housing of the brain, whether that's self-corrected. And then I see people, and it's a really important point, is that you see people 3 or 4 weeks after they've had their acute, their sudden trauma.
Okay, exactly, to give that time of manifestation of.
Absolutely.
Regardless of the severity of the trauma, like even a small, what is like?
Honest, because what I regard myself as treating is the housing, the brain, the underlying membrane system. And that system, as we know, is a self-corrective system. So the body will be busy working, correcting from the accident. And where I want to step in as a practitioner is where there's a legacy, where it hasn't been able to do the final sort of correction. It needs a helping hand. And that's where I come in. And my feeling is, in any sort of acute injury, if someone has a car accident or whatever and says, or falls downstairs, says, "I want to see you," I normally like to leave it 3 or 4 weeks, let the body repair what it can, and then see where it's got stuck, see where it needs a helping hand. So legacies of those traumas don't stay in the body.
And what are the signs and symptoms we have to be aware of? So I'm just thinking myself, I do. I'm 46, but I still do, because I still love it, 2 or 3 times a week, boxing and kickboxing. I just
fantastic. Yeah.
What a lot of banging in my head, and still not lots of them. I try to be careful, but still there's some. What are the signs and we have to be aware, like persistent headache, or what are you looking for in terms of?
I think when you're looking at the environment of a system, you can't be specific about how if there's a problem with the environment, how that will manifest in the system. That's very individual to each person. But there's certain things I might look for, and one would be depression, mood disorder, headaches, sinus problems, tired, run down, any of those sort of generalized symptoms, really. But I wouldn't look for anything specific. But what I would say to someone like yourself who does, you know, periodically suffer brain trauma, or head trauma, is have head checks. You know, have a head check a couple of times a year. Get someone who's trained like myself, and ask them to put their hands on your head. Because when you're looking for this, it's quite easy to pick it up. You know, if things aren't right, if the membrane system's disturbed, it's very palpable, and it's something that can just be addressed there and then, really.
Okay, fascinating. And what is the link with this mental? So head trauma and then mental health. What exactly is the link? What are the areas affect? Why does it affect the mental health, not just the physical? Well, of course, there's a relation, no?
Yeah, it's talking about the behavior of the brain. So, for example, if you have a frontal bone trauma, it's going to potentially upset the housing of the frontal lobe. And, you know, if we go into our sort of modern day phrenology, I'm not a phrenologist, I just want to say that very clearly. But, you know, we look at certain areas of the brain that are associated with certain patterns of behavior. And then you start to realize that this, I mean, for example, this area quite often, very much anger, you know, people, if you feel people here, and they're very compressed, they tend to have anger issues. The other thing is they become very introverted into themselves. Lateral compression down over the frontals, that's more sort of perception with the world, how they relate to others, that sort of thing. I mean, there's nothing, you cannot be specific. It's a generalized thing. So that's but in terms of specific mood disorders, I don't classify. I don't diagnose mood disorders. I don't classify mood disorders. I simply look at the physical housing of the brain and see if it's disturbed or not.
Okay, and that's good because we don't want to, because it's very complex and we want to really categorize, you know, a head frontal. Yeah, but it makes sense what you said. The prefrontal cortex, personality related kind of thing. Even the facial expressions. No, someone is like this.
Oh my God! Yeah. I don't know if you've seen my reel where I talk about wrinkles, because wrinkles are so. You know, I get very upset when people have Botox.
Okay.
Because you can't see the patterns. You know, compressions within I think we talk about compressions within the interosseous compressions. They create a sort of a self-suction field where, and our membranes as we get older are very descriptive, and you can tell a lot just looking at a face from that perspective. And in fact, Leonardo da Vinci was very taken by wrinkles as well. He dismissed the idea that shapes of skulls was of relevance to anything, but he believed, I've forgotten the technical term for the study of wrinkles, but there's a lot that you can understand by the study of wrinkles.
Yeah, I can imagine. Even there is a field. I mean, of course, it's not medical, but even the study of hands and wrinkles in the hands, the biotypes, no, the morphology of you know, there's so much stuff. Okay, and
you have no wrinkles.
No, I do. You know what it is? I think there's something in the way, but I didn't have enough time to. Or interest to go back, but there's something in the definitions of the Zoom. I think it makes my face looks a bit better than what it is actually.
Yeah, it's very smooth.
Okay, so it's not that at all. Because I'm 46, so yeah, here it is. It has you know, make my looks a bit better. So I'm gonna take that. Maybe I do look that good. I don't know. So now it's off. So there is something. Okay. And the cranial field approach. So with this so basically we're talking about the a cranial approach, no? Kind of
Yeah.
is it a more mechanical or kind of intuitive?
Much more mechanical. It's much more mechanical. I mean, that's the other, that this leads on to sort of part 2 of my book, which is I feel very strongly that we don't have a modern day language for osteopathy in its intended format, and we don't have a modern language for osteopathy in the cranial field. And when I was teaching, I taught, my main teaching was in Vienna for about 12 years. I taught osteopathy in the cranial field to physios and doctors doing a master's in osteopathy. And I got quite frustrated with the language that I myself was using, and I got quite frustrated with the explanations that I myself was delivering, that it was formulaic. And that's when I went to study EVOST with Jean-Paul, and really that study is all around biological complexity and looking at chronology and looking at systems and environments. And what it does is it provides us with a very, very simple language and a way of looking at health and disease, which is fundamentally osteopathy. And this model that I talk about in part 2 is what I learned about in EVOST, is where we really start to think in dimensions, and we start to think about the chronology of the development of biological systems. And when we start to suffer disease, symptoms, illness, it's because one of those levels of systems, one of those systemic levels is struggling. So our first point is to identify which system, which dimension we think is struggling, but then we have to decide whether it's a behavioral problem with that system, which is as a consequence of its environment, or whether it's a structural change to that system, in which case it's something that's irreversible, or as Jean-Paul calls it, pathological. And that tells us where to direct our treatment. We as manual therapists are not so good at treating things that are pathological, structural, irreversible, but we are very, very good at looking at the environment of systems which are disturbed behaviorally. And this model allowed me to explain my rationale about membrane disorder, because it's when the structure of the brain is still sound, there's no damage to the brain, but the environment of the brain is compromised. And that's where we, I think, are very potent therapists.
Yeah. I tend to agree. Yeah. When things are irreversible, really, like in the field of pathology, then it's hard to.
It's not us.
But then kind of modulating the environment and giving input here and there, kind of twitching this some stimulus of the cells, some of this caused by mechanical forces, and therefore electrical forces, electrochemical forces, then kind of the nature as a way of normalizing, of finding some homeostasis or allostasis in the middle of chaos. So it's that little extra help.
Yes, I mean that's basically what we're tapping into, isn't it?
Yeah,
the self-corrective process, the natural laws that allow us to reset, reorganize, balance.
There was there was the osteopathic kind of convention and dialect in the beginning, even though some people say it was a lot of philosophy, but that is and was the main goal, and sadly we don't see this type of language anymore. I don't know if it's because of fear, or it's because of fear of ridiculous, or not understanding, but I feel there is the need now, maybe more than ever, to kind of bridge together this identity and these things that we do, which is not esoterical. And there is a lot of research and evidence that points to the influence of mechanical forces in the environment, in the body, and but somehow we kind of, maybe there is some fear of using certain words. I don't know what it is, but it feels now the time to bridge together this two identities, maybe the kind of this new contemporary evidence-based or practice-based, or there's nothing wrong with it, but again, not to lose the touch or the contact with maybe with the school of thought. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah,
I think it's exactly right. I think osteopathy, for me, osteopathy in its intended format, as I talk about it, is really, for me, it's quite simple. I look at it and I think, well, that's common sense. You know, that you've got to irrigate tissues for them to be healthy, and you've got to take the waste products away for them to be healthy. And we look for motion and we restore motion wherever motion is absent. And that's pretty much it. You know, I think we tried to complicate it. But for some reason, I wrote an article about, or an essay about brain types. It's on my website. And there are different types of brain types, and there's brain types that see patterns, and there's other brain types that want, you know, they want detail, they want preciseness, they want certainty, and I think still certainly was of right brain hemisphere. I'm of right brain hemisphere. You're of right brain hemisphere. But a lot of people are of left brain hemisphere, and they just don't like it. And but unfortunately, they're the people with the voices. So they're the ones who sit in authority. They're the ones that run our schools, and they pull osteopathy away from its very sort of simplistic origins and start to medicalize it, orthodox it, evidence-based. We've got to prove this, we've got to prove that, we've got to prove that osteopathy fixes low backs. And you know, we've always been on a losing wicket in that respect, historically, right from the very foundations of osteopathy. A.T. still got sacked from his own school, you know, and he ended up gardening because he just not gave up in the end, but he realized that he just couldn't get through to certain people. And, you know, I'll probably end up gardening as well.
No,
I keep looking at my garden thinking, oh, let's just go and do that. Don't worry about the book.
No, and you know, the Einstein famous how do you say, equation of a very, 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 very complex problem. It's a very simple one. So, you know, EC equals to M4. So the most complex things, if they can translate in a very simple explanation, it's perfect.
That's right. It goes back to complexity and algorithms and just simple patterns, but they keep repeating. And then these amazing sort of complex things morph out of them. But then if you go back to the sort of algorithm, then you can start to effect really complex systems in a very, very simple way with clever hands, skilled hands. You need skilled hands. You know, that's the thing.
And what you just said is actually reminds me of the I think the name is Mandelbrot.
Yes, that's right, Mandelbrot. Yeah.
So the simplicity and the complexity and we are that, aren't we? We're these patterns of life, of complex life, but
yeah,
we are that.
Well, if you look at Jean-Paul's book, and I mean, I studied under Jean-Paul for 6 years, and then I started to work with him a bit on the book, but it was too much for me, and I wanted to do my own book. But you know, it's just repeating physical movements, physical patterns, and with a polarity, and then suddenly, we're always working with polarity.
Life as a verb, no? Is book Life as a Verb? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
And just to wrap up, so I'm going to leave the link of your book and your website and your LinkedIn, your email, if people are interested in contacting you, having the book. Thank you so much for having the time. And just to wrap up, in this approach, you would say it's as significant both the manual approach as the communication approach with the patient when we're dealing to sort of a mental health or head trauma, or is it more like kind of a physical approach of the, it's not the cranial field of just feeling and moving the cerebral fluid. It's not that kind of old idea. No,
not at all. No. It's really, to me, from my perspective, it's fascial work. It's working with the fascia, it's working with the dural system, the central axis to the fascial network, working with distortion within the dural
very good
membrane. The fluids the idea is the fluids all start moving when you restore membrane health, but I personally am not moving fluid. I'm not a big CSF person.
Thank God.
Yeah,
no, you know what?
I would say very as well. I don't counsel my patients. I don't talk. It's not a talking therapy thing. What there is, and there is also a very. I know you want to wrap up. There's a very distinct difference between psychosomatic, if someone's been raped or abused and they harbor a physical lock in their system. That's a very different thing to what I'm talking about, membrane health. Very different thing. And this is a purely structural biomechanical problem that we can fix, but we mustn't pretend that we're counselors or psychotherapists or any of those things.
So there's a very good point in that, because when we say mental health, so there is a difference of somatic symptoms being caused by mental illness due to emotional trauma, physical trauma, all of that. And then, of course, the counseling of psychotherapy or whatever therapy that's needed. You were talking exactly specifically about a functional thing or like mechanical thing as a consequence of head trauma that can cause a variety of symptoms, from mood disorder to neurological deficits for somehow, and all of that. And we can manually intervene in that. And that's very important. And thank God it's not just the intuition and moving the cerebral fluid. It's more like an actual approach. And that's what I really enjoyed about your description of the book, the way you presented the book, and the way you the things you write about. And I'm going to send you a picture offline of something I saw, which is the formation of the movement of tectonic plates throughout billions of years. And they are forming waves that when I looked at the first time, it looked exactly like the neuromeningeal layers of inside the brain, because they're kind of wrapping some of the crust of the earth of the place of that land. And it's almost like this. Nature has these patterns that repeat itself both in and out, and
you can see it everywhere. It's brilliant.
I can see it everywhere. Thank you so much. I just want to say one last thing when we're off. I'm just going to say goodbye of my listeners. Muito obrigado por ter estado aí presente. Espero que tenham gostado. As referências do livro e do site da Joanna Wildy vão estar na descrição do vídeo. Muito obrigado e até uma próxima podcast.